Hello everyone and welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Today we've got a few different things to talk about, including a couple of signings as some more players have signed entry-level contracts, a couple of injury updates from a couple teams around the NHL, and some off-season rumors involving the Montreal Canadiens and the Arizona Coyotes, and we'll get to all of that coming up right now. Hello and welcome to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Today I'll kick things off with a couple of signings that have happened. We'll start with two signings that have happened in the New York Rangers organization. As first, they signed 2022 third-round pick Bryce McConnell-Barker to a 3-year entry-level contract that will have an average annual value of $870,000, and the deal will begin at the start of next season. Now, for McConnell-Barker, he was a really good player in the OHL last year. Seems like he does have somewhat of an NHL future ahead of him. He had a decent season last year in the OHL in his draft year, putting up 23 goals and 49 points in 68 games. But he's definitely stepped up his game this year and played a lot better, putting up 30 goals and 77 points in 68 games. So going over a point per game pace now in the OHL is really good for McConnell-Barker. That Rangers team is still stacked right now, so it's probably going to take him a while to become a regular NHL player. But I think in time he could definitely be a good, decent player for the Rangers. He's mostly a center right now, so I think in time, maybe he spends another year in juniors, then maybe a year or two in minors. In 2 to 3 years' time, I definitely think McConnell-Barker could definitely challenge for maybe like a third or fourth line role with the New York Rangers. I think it's definitely a huge possibility. I think McConnell-Barker is a really good, skilled player. He just needs some more development time. So I think another year in juniors, a couple of years in minors, and he should be able to be challenging for like a bomb six role with the Rangers. So good signing by the Rangers. I like how he's improved this year, and I hope that he can continue to improve his game over the next couple of seasons. Next, we stay with the New York Rangers. They have also signed 2020 5th-round pick Brett Berard to a 3-year entry-level contract that'll have an average annual value of $868,000, and the deal will begin at the start of next season. So for Berard, he's been playing over in the NCAA for the past couple of seasons. Done all right. He actually had a really good season last year, putting up 18 goals and 38 points in 36 games. This year, his production has been a little bit lower, only putting up 10 goals and 24 points in 36 games, so not as good, but I still think that Berard should have an NHL future at some point with the Rangers. Now, when that will be, I'm not exactly sure, but he's probably going to have to spend a couple of years down in the minors before he has any chance at making an NHL roster spot. But I think in time, the left winger could definitely play maybe fourth or third line minutes with the New York Rangers in a couple of years' time, probably 2 to 3 years in the minors, and then maybe he can challenge for a playoff spot. So it's not going to be very soon, but the Science entry-level contract is really good. And to see a good 5th-round pick get his entry-level contract is really great. So good to see Berard get his NHL contract, and hopefully in time he can be a good NHL forward. So good to see the Rangers sign a left winger in Berard and a center in McConnell-Barker, who both seem to have at least bottom 6 NHL futures with the club. So good to see those two get entry-level contracts. Next we go over to the Ottawa Senators, where they signed 2020 2nd-round pick Tyler Kleven to a 3-year entry-level contract. They'll have an average annual value of $917,000, and the deal starts right now before the season ends. Now for Kleven, he was one of the prospects that a lot of people were expected to sign after this year. Kleven's been a really good prospect for the Ottawa Senators, a really good defensive prospect. He plays left side on the defensive end, so another good young prospect on that blue line. The Sens have a lot of those now. They got guys like Jacob Bernard-Docker, Lassie Thompson, now Kleven, all of them coming up in the NHL in the next few years. They just acquired Chychrun, so they have a stacked deep prospect pool. So good to see Kleven get his new entry-level contract. He had a decent season last year in the NCAA, putting up 7 goals, 10 points in 38 games. A much better season this year, putting up 8 goals and 18 points in only 35 games. So good to see Kleven improve his game. I expect him to probably spend at least 1 year, maybe 2, but most likely just 1 year in the minors before he gets a regular opportunity on that Sens defensive core. But I think in time, I definitely think he should be a good top 4 defenseman for the Senators. And I think adding him to that roster is really great for Ottawa. I think they waited long enough to sign him to his entry-level contract, so good to see that. So good to see them finally get him under contract. Given the fact that his contract starts this year, I wouldn't be too surprised if the Sens maybe played him in a couple of games towards the end of the stretch. We know that there's a few injuries on that team right now, so to get him into a couple of games of NHL action before the season ends would be smart. And then hopefully he plays only maybe like a year in the minors. And after that, he's playing consistent NHL minutes. So good to see Clevin get his entry-level contract. And finally, with the Chicago Blackhawks, they signed recent 2022 second-round pick Paul Ludwinski to a 3-year entry-level contract that will have an average annual value of $932,000. Now, for Ludwinski, he seems like he's going to be a really great prospect for the Blackhawks. As the center was coming off a fantastic season last year, putting up 16 goals and 43 points in 67 games. But he missed some time this year, only gone to 47 games. Still put up a decent point total, putting up 9 goals and 34 points in those 47 games. And he was on pace to be higher point total if he got into the same amount of games as he did last year. So good to see Ludwinski sign. He seems like either a good third or second line center of the future. I think Ludwinski was a really good pickup for the Blackhawks in last year's draft. He's probably still going to have another year in juniors and then probably another year in minors. So I wouldn't expect him to be in the NHL for at least the next 2 seasons. But I think in 2 to 3 years' time, Ludwinski could definitely be challenging for like a middle six role with the Hawks. And with the Hawks trying to rebuild this team, I definitely think he should have an NHL shot. So to start, he needs his NHL contract, and now he's got that. So good to see Ludwinski in Chicago sign. It's another good prospect for their forward group in Chicago. Clevin finally signs in Ottawa. It's a good prospect on their defensive end. And then a couple of good prospects signed with the Rangers, and Berard and McCall Barker, who should have shots at the NHL in the not-too-distant future. So good to see all 4 of these guys sign, as there will probably be more entry-level contracts being signed before the end of the seasons. But it's good to see these 4 players get their new contracts with their current teams. So that's all the signings we're going to get to. Next, over to the injury update part of the video. We'll start with the Buffalo Sabres. They've had both good and bad news on the injury front, as they have lost both Tage Thompson and Craig Anderson to upper body injuries, and they're both out day-to-day right now. But they did get back Eric Comrie off of an injury. So for Comrie, he only missed 2 weeks due to his lower body injury. I know we talked a little while ago about how Comrie was out for a couple of weeks. It was week to week, so good to see it's only a short-term injury for Comrie, and he was able to get back into game action. He's played really well since coming back from his injury, so good to see that the injury didn't take much toll on Comrie, and he got right back into game action. He's definitely done well this year, playing with Anderson and Luukkonen in net, so good to see Comrie recover from his injury. And Comrie recovering from his injury couldn't have happened at a better time, as Craig Anderson has suffered an upper body injury and is out day-to-day, so not great news for Anderson. Also, Tage Thompson's out day-to-day right now with upper body injury, so not good news for the Sabres to lose their good quality backup goalie in Anderson and their probably best skater right now in Tage Thompson. So not great to lose either of those guys, but they're only out day-to-day right now, so I'll expect them to probably be back within the next week, maybe a week and a half. Hopefully they're only out for a game or 2 and then they're back in the game action. So good to see Comrie get back. He's definitely a really good goalie with Anderson and Luukkonen this year. But bad news to see Anderson and Thompson go down. But they should only be out for the short term and be back to help the Sabres playoff push in the not too distant future. Next, with the Chicago Blackhawks, they've had a handful of injury updates. We'll start with the injury news, as they've had 3 more injuries. Jared Tenorti is currently suffering with a hip injury and is out day-to-day. So once again, day-to-day, he shouldn't be out too long, maybe a game or 2. Maybe somewhere within a week he should be back, but he shouldn't be out for too long. Tenorti's definitely been in and out of the lineup this year due to different injuries, so not good to see him go down with yet another one, but hopefully he should be back soon and continue to be helping that third pair in Chicago. But the other 2 are a little bit more significant, as Blackwell has a hernia, and Philip Kershaw is currently dealing with a shoulder injury, and both are currently going to be out for the season. Kershaw has been announced as done for the season. Blackwell's out for 3 months, and with the Blackhawks not being able to make the playoffs, that puts him out for the season as well. So not great news. Blackwell's been a really good bomb 6 for the Hawks this year. Definitely been in and out of the lineup, but when he's been in the lineup, he's definitely been really good. So not good to see Blackwell finish up the season injured. He's only out for the next 3 months, so he should definitely be back well before training camp. So hopefully he can recover from his injury and get back for training camp at the start of next season for the Hawks. As for Kershaw, out for the season with a shoulder injury, once again, not great news. Kershaw's actually had a really good season this year, so once again, same thing. He should probably be back before the start of training camp, so not great to see Kershaw and Blackwell get out, but hopefully they can recover from their injuries and get back at training camp. But they did get some good news as well, as they got Andreas Englund back from his hamstring injury and Anders Bjork back from his undisclosed injury. Both are only out for about a couple of weeks, so good to see that both guys were not out for too long. Both were deadline pickups. Bjork from Buffalo, Englund from Colorado. So good to see both of these guys get back. They're both currently in the final year of their deals. Bjork's an RFA, Englund's a UFA, so they're both trying to work towards their new contracts. So good to see both these guys get back into game action. Englund's a good third pair defenseman. Bjork's showing in Chicago that he can still be a good bomb six forward. So good to see both these guys get back, and hopefully they can continue to do well and improve their game before the end of the season. So good to see Englund and Bjork back on the Blackhawks roster, but still sad news to see Khrushchev and Blackwell done for the season and Tenorti out right now. Next, with the San Jose Sharks, they've had a couple of players become injured. First, with Andreas Johnsson, he suffered an undisclosed injury. He's out week to week. And also, Evgeny Svechnikov has suffered a lower body injury, and he's out week to week. So, Svechnikov and Johnsson both out week to week. Not great news. Svechnikov's been in and out of the lineup this year as a bomb 6-4. Done all right when he's gone into games, but he hasn't been a fantastic addition, so I don't think losing him is going to be overly hurtful to the San Jose Sharks lineup. Johnsson was acquired in the New Jersey Devils trade for Meyer. Actually fitting really well with the Sharks so far this year, so not great to see him go down with an injury. Now, they're both out week to week, so that means they could be out for the season. The end of the regular season is only 2.5 weeks away, and the Sharks aren't making the playoffs, so if they're out for longer than 2 weeks, I wouldn't expect them to be back for the rest of the season, so not great news for either of those guys, but hopefully they're not out too long. They're back within the next week, week and a half, and they can get back into a few games before the NHL season ends, but definitely not great for those two. And then also Matthew Benning and Alex Barabanov are both day-to-day right now with lower body injuries, so not great news. Benning's been a really good third pair defenseman for the Sharks this year. Barabanov's been a really good top six forward, so not great to lose either of these guys. I would expect both of them to probably be back within the next week. They're only out day to day, so unlike Johnsson and Svechnikov, they should be back in the not too distant future and should get into a couple of games before the season ends, but definitely not great news to see those two go down with an injury either. So not great to see any of these Sharks players go down with an injury. Johnsson and Svechnikov are going to be out for the next couple of weeks. Hopefully they get back before the season ends, but it's quite possible that their season could be over. And then Benning and Barabanov are both out day to day right now, and hopefully they return in the near future and help the Sharks finish out this season strong. And lastly, with the Washington Capitals, they've had a couple of injury updates. First was Darcy Kuemper and Craig Smith. Smith had a lower body injury, Kuemper had an upper body injury, and both were back very quickly after suffering those injuries. So for Smith, he only missed one game due to his injury. Same thing with Kuemper, and they were both back really quickly. So good to see both of those guys get back off of their injuries. Kemper's been a really good starting goaltender for the Caps this year. Craig Smith has done all right on a third line role since being acquired from the Boston Bruins in the Dmitry Orlov trade. So both guys have done pretty good this year, so good to see them both get back and not be out too long due to their injuries. The more important name for the Washington Capitals to get back off of injuries was John Carlson, as after suffering a pretty bad face injury, he was out of action for the last 3 months. I thought he probably would have missed a little bit more time given the severity of the injury, but he was able to come back, and he's going to be back in the game action. So good to see the Caps get Carlson back. He's a really good piece of that D-core, and after all the moves they made to move guys out like Orlov and Gustafsson out, he's going to provide a huge boost to that defensive core. So good to see Carlson get back. He's a really good defender for the Washington Capitals and should definitely provide a huge boost to that blue line as the Caps continue to push for a playoff spot. There was one bad injury update for the Washington Capitals as forward Sonny Milano has suffered an upper body injury and is out week to week right now. So once again, with some of those other players, like I said, who are out week to week right now, it's possible they could be out for the season depending on how long their recovery takes and how quickly they could be back. So same thing with Milano. Could have played his final game of the season, but it's also possible he could be back within the next week and a half, 2 weeks, and maybe play a couple of games towards the end of the season. But definitely good to see Kuemper and Smith not deal too long with their injuries. Good to see Carlson back after a 3 month layoff. Not great news to see Milano out right now due to his injury, and hopefully he can recover in the near future and get back into game action, as the Capitals are definitely trying to push for a playoff spot, and they can use all the help they can get. So hopefully Milano can get back in the not too distant future. And that's all the injury updates I want to get to today. Next we go over to the off-season rumor part of the video. Now, the Montreal Canadiens were eliminated on Tuesday, so that makes it now 6 teams who have been eliminated. So I want to go over another off-season rumor video like we did last week with the Sharks and the Ducks and the Blackhawks and the Blue Jackets, and now we're going to focus our attention on the Canadiens and the Arizona Coyotes. So to start with, we'll start with the Canadiens. The Canadiens have dealt with a ton of injuries this year again. That was their whole point of last year, how they went from making the Stanley Cup final to going down to missing the playoffs. Their offense has almost been non-existent. Their defensive game hasn't been great this year, but most of that is due to a young roster and injuries. I mean, their defense has been really young this year. I mean, Justin Barron's getting his first taste of NHL action this year. So is Hayton, so is Vejmelka, so is Jordan Harris. So they have a lot of good young pieces on that blue line. So a lot of inexperience there. And guys like Edmundson and Matheson and Savard have all been in and out of the lineup this year due to injuries. So definitely been difficult for the Canadiens to stay healthy, and all of those good veterans are sort of the ones getting injured. So it has been great for them. Even Jake Allen, their goaltender, has been in and out of the lineup due to injuries this year, so that hasn't been great for the Canadiens. So definitely those injuries and the experience on the blue line has led to their defense being one of the worst in the NHL this year. If you look at their forward group, they had a lot of good forwards this year, but once again, injuries kept on biting them. They still have a ton of injuries right now on that forward group. So once again, the injuries plus the fact that they're starting that rebuild really hurt this team this year. And that's the main reason why the Montreal Canadiens do not have good stats this year and were not able to push for a playoff spot. Now, I think in the offseason, they could definitely do a few things to retool the blue line. I think in the offseason, they could definitely retool a couple of things and make this team a lot more difficult to play against. If you look at their blue line, I wouldn't really change much. They have a couple of good young players like Struble and Biron who should be full NHLers in the not too distant future. They already have guys like goalie, Xhekaj, and Harris play full NHL roles this year. And they still have a couple of good veterans like Matheson, Savard, and Edmundson. So I don't think that they would change much on the Canadiens' blue line. Maybe they add like a third pair of defensemen to improve that decor a little bit. Maybe another good veteran. I also wonder if they maybe move on from Joel Edmundson. There was a lot of talk over the past year that he would be traded. He just didn't get traded at the deadline. With him entering the final year of his deal, I do wonder if the Canadiens wind up trading him before the season starts. I also think he could be an in-season trade toward the deadline. But I do wonder if Edmundson could possibly be on the block for the Canadiens, so that's going to be an interesting situation to see. The goaltending, I think, would still be set for next year. Montembeault is entering the final year of his deal. Allen's starting his new 3-year contract extension next year. But I do wonder that with Primo still doing really good in the AHL and maybe earning himself a backup role next year, maybe the Canadiens consider moving one of their goalies. We know Allen's done really well as a starter, and there will be a lot of teams lining up to get his services in the offseason. Montembeault's actually had not a bad season either. I would definitely think that a $1 million cap hit for the next season, there would be a lot of teams interested in Montembeault, so it would definitely be interesting to see. But I think if the Canadiens feel that Primo is ready for an NHL role, they possibly could move Allen or Montembeault. If they don't feel like he's ready for an NHL role next year, then I would expect them to probably continue with the Allen-Montembeault tandem. But I think their view on Primo being ready for the NHL is definitely going to decide whether they move a guy like Allen or Montembeault, but those two are definitely going to be another ones to possibly keep our eye on. In the forward group, they have a couple of guys coming off of their books. We know that they've been trying to move some of their players. They were able to move the Donov, but we know guys like Drouin and Byron and Monahan are all UFAs. I would say Monahan's probably the most likely coming back, and it's just dealt with a ton of injuries this year. I do wonder if the Canadiens may be saying to like a 1 or 2 year deal to remain with the Canadiens, but I think Drouin and Byron are most likely gone after this year. But the big piece of business on the forward group for the Canadiens will be to try and sign Cole Caulfield. He's currently an RFA. I would expect them to try and sign him to a long-term extension, maybe something like a 7 to 8 year deal at right around like $7.5 to $8.5 million. So I would expect them to definitely try and lock up Caulfield long-term. So that's going to be probably priority number 1 for the Canadiens. But after that, they have a lot of good young forward prospects. And one of the problems with the Canadiens had this year was that they had a lot of those veterans like a Dodonov, a Drouin, a Hoffman, who they tried to play a lot to increase their trade value. But they took some of their spots from some of their younger players. So definitely not great. I would expect guys like Raphael Harvey-Pinard, who's actually had a fantastic year this year in the NHL level with all the injuries, get into an NHL role next year. I would expect guys like Philip Misar, Jan Mysak, Owen Beck, Emil Heineman to at least contend for a roster spot. I would definitely think there would be at least 2 or 3 young players making the NHL roster next year for the Canadiens. I also wonder if they maybe go out and try and acquire 1 or 2 decent top 9 forwards to sort of round out that roster. Maybe a little bit more better in production than Dodonov, Drouin, and Hoffman have been, but definitely I think that's another possibility. If you're looking for trade options in the forward group, I'm still looking at Hoffman and Armia in the forward group. Hoffman's done all right, but he's going to be entering the final year of his deal, and with the Canadiens possibly retaining 50% of his salary, I do wonder if that becomes a little bit more appealing to some of these other teams. Armia still not playing overly well as a pretty good third line forward, but he's just not living up to that $3.4 million cap hit. So I do wonder if Armia gets moved. There's also a lot of talk about Pierre-Luc Dubois possibly being moved to Montreal in the offseason. I think that's going to be a very interesting situation to watch. Probably the most interesting situation besides Caulfield to watch for the Montreal Canadiens, because I think if they acquire Dubois, then that makes Dach and or Dvorak expendable, because you're going to have a 1-2 punch of Dubois and Suzuki in the forward group. Dach and Dvorak can play the wing, but I would think that if neither one of them were moved to the Jets in a Dubois trade, then I would think that at least one probably gets moved. So I would definitely think that if they do acquire Dubois in the offseason, expect one of Dvorak or Dach, but I would expect most likely Dvorak to be moved before the season starts. So definitely, I think there's definitely a lot of possibilities here for the Canadiens. Signing Caulfield is going to be priority number 1. I could see a move of goalie in Annalyn or Montembeault. I could see the move Edmondson in the defensive end, Hoffman, Armia, Dvorak, Dach if they wind up acquiring Dubois, and I think this team could definitely take a couple of strides next year if they can continue to play well and get their young players more time. But definitely going to be interesting to see. If they do sign Caulfield to an $8 million extension, they only have $73 million in cap space right now. That would create a little bit of a tight cap. They do have the ability to put Price on long-term injury reserve again next year because it doesn't sound like he's going to be playing. But still, it's probably going to need to move out a contract or two, and I still think Hoffman, Dvorak, Armia are most likely options. But definitely going to be interested to see from Montreal. But I definitely think that they're going to try and retool and get some more younger players in this lineup to try and improve this team. As for the Arizona Coyotes, they're probably going to the offseason with the same sort of mindset they've been doing over the past couple of years, which is to get some more young players into their lineup for next year and use their cap space to their advantage. If you look at their team, they haven't done overly bad this year. They still haven't done fantastic. They're still bottom 10 in goal scoring and defense, so they haven't done overly fantastic, but they're not doing half bad. I think there are a lot of people who thought they would have done a lot worse than they are right now, and I think they're probably surprising a little bit of people. I thought a lot of people would think they would be fighting with the Hawks, the Jackets, and the Ducks for the Bedard sweepstakes, but they've actually done quite well this year. So I think if they play the offseason right and they continue to infuse youth into this roster, they could continue to take steps forward. I think if you look at their roster, their goaltending position is really set right now. There's some talk that they could still move Vejmelka. I do think that's going to be a situation we watch out for in the offseason. I think there will be a lot of teams lining up to acquire a good goaltender like Vejmelka, but he still has 2 years left, so I don't think it's a guarantee he's moved. And if they keep him, they have a good tandem in goaltending. They would have Vejmelka as a starter, and then they could have Ingram or possibly Prosvetov as their backup. So I think it's definitely possible that Vejmelka stays and continues to play with the Yotes. But I also think it's a possibility that he's being traded. So it's going to be an interesting situation to see. But I think the goalie position is pretty good. As for their defensive position, I think that could use some more improvements this year. They have a good young players like Vejmelka, Soderstrom, Moser, who seem to have really good futures with this team. They don't really have much on expiring deals right now in the defensive end. And they have a couple of good young players like Kesselring, Kolya Chinook, and Lamoureux, who should be able to carve out NHL roster spots in the next year or two for the Arizona Coyotes. So I think they would definitely consider using their cap space to their advantage again. They definitely still need a little bit more contracts to get to the cap floor for next year. So I would definitely expect them to try and use their cap space to either sign a couple of defensemen in free agency or take on a bad contract from another team. I think that's another possibility as well. But definitely going to be interesting to see. I think they need at least 1 or 2 more veterans on that team. They do have a couple of good veterans who will be entering the final year of their deals in Nemeth and Joshua Brown, but I think they do need a couple more vets. So hopefully they go out and they acquire either via trade or free agency a couple more defensemen, but I definitely think they will. On the forward group, they actually have a decent forward group. If Voracek, who's injured now, can get back and is healthy to start next year, not a guarantee that happens, but if he is, they have a few good players in that roster with a guy like Voracek, Keller, Schmaltz, Crouse, definitely a couple of other good young players as well. Some possible trade options, in my opinion, on that forward group would be Nick Schmaltz and Lawson Crouse. There was a lot of talk around the trade line that both of those guys could be moved. Schmaltz has 3 years left on his deal. Crouse has 4. Crouse has a $4.3 million cap hit. Schmaltz has just over 5. So I would expect both of those guys to possibly be moved. I think Crouse is a little bit more likely than Schmaltz, but I would think that both the guys have a decent shot at being moved in the offseason. I also wonder about a couple of younger players like Hayton or Keller. We know that both guys are doing quite well this year in Arizona, and they're both pretty young players, so I'm not sure if they'll be moved this offseason. But both of them are playing pretty well and would definitely bring in pretty decent return values for the Arizona Coyotes. So I think Keller and Hayton are definitely going to be some other players who would be interesting to watch in the offseason as possible trade chips. They have a couple of good young players like a Matias Maccelli and Dylan Guenther, who I think should definitely be solid top 6 forwards next year at the NHL level. If they can sign him, Logan Cooley could definitely be another good addition to the Arizona Coyotes, being like a top 2 center. So there's definitely a couple of really good prospects in the system for the Arizona Coyotes who I think could definitely make NHL appearances next year. But once again, they could definitely use a couple more veterans on that forward group, so maybe going out and using their cap space to get back contracts, or going out via free agency and signing players to 1-year deals where they can move them at the deadline would be another route that Arizona goes again. So definitely going to be interesting to see. They're only at $57 million in cap space right now, and that's with guys like Shea Weber, Brian Little, possibly Jacob Voracek on injury reserve, so that's going to be an interesting situation for the Arizona Coyotes, as even with all of those guys on injury reserve, they're still $5 million short of next year's cap floor. So like I said, they're probably going to have to use their cap space either via trade or free agency to sign a couple forwards, a couple of defensemen, and try and help this team improve and continue to improve as they try and round out this rebuild and become a little bit more like a playoff contender. I would like to know what you think. What sort of things do you think the Canadiens and the Arizona Coyotes will put high on their priority list for the offseason, and what do you think those two teams could do in this offseason to improve their team for next year? But that's all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video and subscribe. I also do a blog, which I'll leave a link to that in the description below. I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.